Linh, 24 years old, lived and worked in Saigon. The story began on a July afternoon when she moved into an old rented house tucked away in a quiet alley of District 3. The three-story house, number 24, was where Linh hoped to begin a new life after a family tragedy. The taxi stopped in front of a small alley. The driver turned around and spoke curtly. He glanced quickly at the rearview mirror and said, "Here we are, miss. Number 24's in that alley over there. Just turn in and you'll see it." Linh gave a slight nod, pulling her heavy suitcase down to the sidewalk. Muttering, "Thank you," she stood still for a moment. The alley was fairly wide but eerily quiet. The afternoon sunlight cast faded hues on the peeling walls, reflecting a worn-out, weary tone. Even the sparrows chirping seemed to be stifled in this space. Linh inhaled deeply and told herself, "It's just an old house. Don't overthink it." House number 24 appeared after a few steps. Faded yellow walls, a rusted black iron door, a second-floor balcony with a few wilted orchid pots. She hesitated for a second, then rang the bell. The chime echoed long, as if the person inside was deliberately not answering. Nearly a minute passed before a middle-aged woman peeked out from behind the curtain. Her expression clearly hesitant. The woman spoke softly. "Are you, Linh?" Linh nodded with a gentle smile. "Yes, I contacted Mr. Kwong to rent the house. He said you're Ms. Lan, the owner." The woman named Lan slowly opened the iron door, her eyes fixed on Linh. "Yes, the house is vacant. You can move in whenever. But," she paused, then turned her face away. "You should be careful, the second-floor balcony is a bit weak. Don't stand too close to the edge." Linh frowned. "Sorry?" Ms. Lan avoided the question, her voice more urgent. "Come see the room first." Linh pushed her suitcase in and followed. A musty smell hit her nose, mixed with the lingering scent of incense in the living room. She glanced around. The space was wide, simply arranged, but something about it made her feel uneasy. The wooden stairs leading up creaked as she stepped on them. Ms. Lan pointed upstairs and said in a commanding tone, "Your room is on the second floor. To the left. It has a door to the balcony. Just make sure you lock it carefully." Linh asked, "Does the balcony face the alley?" Ms. Lan avoided eye contact. "Yeah, it faces the front. But don't go out there at night." Linh gave a light laugh and teased, "Afraid of burglars?" She didn't answer. She just snorted softly and walked back into the kitchen. That night, Linh sat on the mattress, leaning against the wall, watching the ceiling fan rotate slowly. Everything had been unpacked. The room was old, but not terrible. A light breeze blew through the window, carrying with it the scent of Saigon at night. She opened her phone and texted Trang, her best friend in Da Nang. "Linh, I'm fine. The house is a bit old. The landlady's kind of cold. But it's really quiet. I like it." Trang. "That's hit or miss. Be careful. Old houses sometimes have, stuff. Still, props to you for living alone. Linh, I'll try sleeping here tonight. I'll tell you everything tomorrow." Hee hee. Before she could hit send, Linh suddenly froze. A soft noise, like the iron door gently tapping the wall. She looked up at the balcony door, which was slightly ajar. The white curtain swayed lightly. Linh frowned. The wind wasn't strong enough to move the door. Was it? She picked up her phone and stepped outside. The balcony was small, just enough space for one person. Outside was the empty alley. No one. Linh reassured herself. Maybe Ms. Lan was right. This balcony is really old. The door might have slipped off its hinges. She closed the door, locked the latch securely, and turned back into the room. But as she did, she clearly heard a whisper right beside her ear. A man's voice, deep, cold, and hoarse. "This afternoon, did you see me?" Linh jolted. She spun around. The balcony was empty. The curtain no longer moved. No wind, no shadow. Her heart pounded. She backed toward the bed, stammering, "Who's there? Who's out there?" No answer. Lin's eyes widened. She swallowed hard, then suddenly shouted, "Is anyone there?" Footsteps echoed from downstairs. Ms. Lan called out, "Ms. Linh? What is it? What's wrong?" Linh spoke urgently. "Please come upstairs. Someone was standing on the balcony." Ms. Lan panted as she reached the room, her eyes scanning quickly around before stepping out onto the balcony. She returned, visibly pale. Her voice was quieter. "There's no one. I told you, don't go out on the balcony at night." Linh asked shakily, But I clearly heard someone, a man's voice. Ms. Lan remained silent, walked over, shut the balcony door, locked it carefully, and placed her hand on Lin's shoulder. Her voice trembled. Have you ever seen a figure standing there? Lin was confused. What? She didn't answer anymore. She just looked Lin straight in the eyes, full of helplessness. That night, Lin tossed and turned, unable to sleep. She tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was tired. Maybe it was her imagination. Maybe it was the new house. But every time she closed her eyes, it felt like someone was standing on the balcony, staring in. She couldn't see the face, just a shadowy figure, but it was clearly watching her. Then around 3 a.m., just as she was drifting off, her phone rang, an unfamiliar number, no name. Lin hesitated for a moment, then picked up. That same deep, gravelly voice came through, dragging each word. Don't you see? I've been waiting? She threw the phone to the floor, gasping, eyes wide. The room light turned on. She ran downstairs, banging on Ms. Lan's door. The door opened a crack. Ms. Lan, still in her pajamas, hair messy, her eyes widened in panic upon seeing Lin. Lin trembled. I want to move out. Ms. Lan hesitated. You've only been here 1 day. Lin choked up. I heard his voice. It was real, not a dream. She looked down at the floor and sighed. I know. Her voice dropped, as if speaking to herself. I thought after all these years, it would have stopped. Lin panicked. What stopped? Please tell me. Ms. Lan raised her head, her eyes filled with sorrow. There used to be a young couple who rented the room you're in. The husband died in an accident, right under that balcony. The wife went mad and disappeared. Lin swallowed. So, that figure tonight, was him? Ms. Lan didn't answer. The house went silent. Outside, the wind crept through the cracks of the old walls, like someone was softly moaning in the night. Lin stood frozen. For the first time, she realized this was no ordinary place. And from the second floor, came a soft hiss. A man's voice. You still haven't answered me. The next morning, the air was strangely foggy. Inside the house, the atmosphere felt heavy, as if a thin veil had settled over every layer of the old plaster walls. Lin sat hugging her knees by the window, her eyes blankly staring out at the alley in front. She had slept less than an hour last night. Ms. Lan set a cup of hot tea on the table, her voice still soft as ever. Drink some to wake up. Dear. Lin didn't look at her, only asked quietly, have you ever heard that voice? Ms. Lan hesitated, her gaze drifting far off as if trying to recall. It's been a long time since I've heard it. But back then, when that couple had just moved in, every night you could hear footsteps on the balcony. And every time, it was exactly 3 in the morning. Lin shuddered, her hand gripping the teacup so tightly that the tea rippled over the rim. What happened, exactly? Ms. Lan sighed, leaning gently against the wooden chair. The husband died falling from the second-floor balcony. No one really knows why. Some said he jumped, others said his wife pushed him. The police didn't investigate thoroughly. Then the wife disappeared. The house sat empty for over a year before being rented again. Lin asked slowly, the people who moved in after, did they experience anything strange? Ms. Lan clicked her tongue. Yes, but no one ever spoke openly about it. Some claimed they saw a man in a white shirt standing on the balcony at noon. Others said they heard a voice whispering right next to their ears while sleeping. One thing's certain, no one stayed longer than 2 months. Lin clutched the hem of her nightgown, her lips pressed tightly together. She knew she could move out that very morning, but something heavy settled in her chest, as if she needed to stay. To uncover the truth, she said with a sigh, I'll stay, at least for a week. If anything else strange happens, I'll leave. That afternoon, Lin went to a small cafe at the end of the alley. She needed some fresh air to calm herself down. The cafe owner, a thin woman in her 40s, brought out her drink. Glancing quickly toward the mouth of the alley, she spoke first. You just moved into house number 24, right? Lin looked surprised. Yes. How did you know? The woman pulled out a chair and sat down across from her, her voice dropping. No one stayed long in that house. I saw you with your suitcase yesterday morning. Did you hear anything strange last night? Lin hesitated for a moment, then decided to nod. Yes, a man's voice. It wasn't a dream, I'm sure of it. The woman stayed silent. Her expression wasn't surprised, as though she'd heard it all before. She spoke softly. That night, He died during a heavy rainstorm. The balcony was slippery, but people in the neighborhood said they heard him and his wife arguing loudly before that. Some even said they heard things breaking and crying. But the police wrote in the report, slipped and fell due to wet floor. Lynn asked slowly, his wife, she disappeared after that? The woman nodded, her voice somber. Yeah, the next morning, people saw the door wide open. Inside, there was only a pair of sandals and the sharp scent of burnt incense. No one ever saw her again. Lynn squinted slightly. What was his name? The cafe owner replied quietly. Dewey. That night, Lynn locked the door early, drew the curtains tightly over the balcony, and placed her phone on the nightstand. She didn't turn on the nightlight. Only the soft yellow glow from the hallway lamp outside the window lit the room. The space was silent. The ticking wall clock scratched at her ears. 2:55 a.m. Lynn lay still. Her heart began to race. 2:58 a.m. Footsteps sounded from the balcony. Clear, human steps, slow and steady, as if pacing back and forth. 2:59 a.m. She swallowed hard, clutching her phone. 3 a.m. A deep voice, right beside the glass door. You still haven't told me who you are. Lynn sat upright, trembling. I don't know you. Please stop bothering me. The voice returned, softer this time, but icy cold. I'm not bothering you. I'm looking for the one who left me. Lynn stood up, stepped slowly toward the balcony door, her hands shaking as she drew the curtain aside. No one, but footprints were clearly visible in the thin layer of dust on the tiled balcony floor. Adult-sized, barefoot, and wet. Lynn trembled and stepped back. Her phone on the bed vibrated. The screen lit up, a new message from an unnamed number. You're in her room. You know that, don't you? Lynn dropped the phone, her whole body cold. She backed against the wall, wrapping her arms around herself. But suddenly, her eyes caught a small photograph stuck behind the mirror. She had never seen it before. Lynn picked it up, a faded photo. In it was a young man, his eyes full of sorrow, standing on the balcony. The balcony angle was exactly like the one she stood on each morning. Behind him, the faint figure of a woman in a white dress. Her face was blurred, but her hand rested clearly on his shoulder. Lynn collapsed onto the bed, breathing heavily. That photo hadn't just been there by chance. Someone wanted her to see it. The next morning, Lynn sought out the cafe owner again. She placed the photo on the table and pushed it toward her. Do you know who this is? The woman looked stunned for a moment, then reached out with a trembling hand to pick up the photo. That's him. That's Dewey. But how did you get this? Lynn recounted everything from the night before, leaving nothing out. The woman stayed silent for a while, then whispered, the person behind him, that's VY. His wife. But, in this photo, her hand's on his shoulder. It looks affectionate, but she never really loved him. Lynn frowned. How do you know that? The cafe owner lowered her voice. Because VY used to come here and confide in me. She married him because of a debt. He loved her, but she only wanted to run away. She once said, I wish he would disappear. And then, he did. Lynn whispered, do you think she pushed him? The woman shook her head, her eyes heavy. I don't dare say, but she had a train ticket out of Saigon the night before he died. And that ticket was never used. That night, Lynn tried something new. She lit an incense stick in her room, placed the photo on the table, and spoke softly but clearly. If you're Dewey, I'm not VY. I didn't leave you, but you need to tell me what you want. Outside, wind swept through the balcony, though the door was firmly shut. The curtain lifted lightly, the candle flickered out, and then, another voice spoke. This time, a woman's, soft as breath. I didn't mean to kill you. I just pushed a little. I didn't expect. Lynn turned around sharply. No one, but she knew, from now on, it wouldn't just be Dai's voice she'd hear. VY had returned too. The next morning, Lynn woke up with a strange sensation that someone had been whispering in her ear all night. She opened her tired eyes. The room was unchanged, bathed in pale morning light filtering through the thin curtains. But what startled her was, the incense stick she had lit on the table the night before had been relit. The ashes fell in long, even strands, drifting straight down despite there being no wind. Someone, or something, had returned during the night. Lynn sat up abruptly and headed straight to the kitchen. Ms. Lan was sitting there picking vegetables, not looking up when she heard Lynn's footsteps. Lin sat beside her and asked in a low voice, "Did you come into my room last night?" Ms. Land shook her head casually. "I went to bed early. My eyesight's poor. I'm afraid I'll fall if I go upstairs at night." Lin swallowed. "The incense I lit, someone lit it again. While I was sleeping." Ms. Land set the basket of vegetables down and, for the first time, looked Lin in the eyes. Her voice was low and very slow. "You've heard VY now, haven't you?" Lin nodded. Ms. Land turned away, her eyes seeming to drift into a distant past. "She's still here, since the night she disappeared. But unlike Dewey, she doesn't look for anyone. She avoids being seen. She's scared, and also, regretful." Lin pressed. "Regretful about what?" Ms. Land didn't answer. She simply stood up and went to her room. That afternoon, Lin went to the market to buy some groceries. On her way back, an old lottery ticket vendor sitting under a tree stared intently at her. As she walked past, he suddenly asked, "You live in number 24, don't you?" Lin stopped in her tracks and looked at him. "Yes. How do you know?" The old man chuckled softly, his voice hoarse from years of smoking. "You look a lot like VY." Lin's heart skipped a beat. He continued slowly. "I used to see her sitting alone on the balcony, crying, in broad daylight, but no one dared to come close." Lin sat down on the stone bench beside him, her voice soft. "Back then, did what people say really happen?" The old man took a drag from his cigarette. His eyes were cloudy, but his voice was sharp. "I don't know if she pushed her husband or not, but after that night, people saw her shadow pacing around the house for 3 straight days. No eating, no sleeping, then she vanished." Lin asked quietly, "Has anyone seen her since?" He shook his head. "No, but sometimes, late at night, people say they hear a woman crying in the second-floor bathroom. Like someone trapped in their own guilt." That night, Lin placed the photo back on the table, alongside a white candle. She sat across from it, her gaze steady, calmer than the nights before. "VY, if you're still here, I'm not your enemy. I just want to know, what did you do?" The clock struck 3. The room dimmed, as if someone had turned down the brightness of the air itself. Wind began to blow, not from the window, but from within the walls. A female voice rose beside Lin's ear. "I didn't mean to. I only pushed a little." Lin trembled but didn't back away. She straightened up, took a deep breath, and asked, "Why did you push him? Was it fear? Or hatred?" A long sigh filled the room. So long, it felt like someone collapsing. "I just wanted him to let me go. I never loved, but I didn't think he'd actually fall like that." Lin whispered, "You didn't call for help?" The voice hesitated. I panicked. I ran, but I came back. I tried to save him, but it was too late." A soft sob echoed, light as mist. Lin sat still, her eyes welling up. She spoke gently, like the breeze. "He's looking for you, you know." Silence. Then a deep, very deep voice called out, distant but clear, "She never looked me in the eyes one last time, did you see?" After that night, Lin couldn't sleep, not entirely out of fear, but because the sorrow woven into Dai's words seemed to swirl endlessly around her. The next afternoon, she returned alone to the attic. Her fingers combed through every remaining piece of paper in the old chest, her eyes scanning each corner carefully. In the dim light filtering through the small roof window, Lin spotted a tiny sheet of paper wedged between the wooden planks. She gently pulled it out. A letter, folded neatly. The paper had turned a brownish gray. There was no name on the outside, only 3 roughly scribbled words, "Don't come back." Lin unfolded it and read softly aloud, "If anyone finds this letter, please listen to me. I didn't hurt him, but I'm guilty. I once thought leaving was the best for both of us. But I was wrong. Maybe I should have stayed from the start, to say goodbye properly. But I was afraid, and I chose to run. If he's still here, please tell him, I'm sorry, even if it's too late." There was no signature, but Lin knew for certain it was from VY. That evening, as sunlight cut across the balcony and painted a long streak on the wall, Lin placed the letter on the table, sat across from it, her hands clasped together. She whispered, "And Dewey, if you can still hear me, this letter is real. It's from VY. I don't know if you can forgive her, but I believe she never meant to leave like that." There was no wind, no sound, but the balcony door gave a faint click. It slowly opened on its own. Lin stepped out, looking down the familiar alleyway. The rooftops were still. The street was empty. But down below, on the mossy wall at the alley's entrance, she saw a strange circular stain, as if rainwater had gathered there alone, refusing to dry. She didn't know why, but her heart beat faster. That night, Lynn returned to the cassette player. She wanted to hear Dai's voice again, to feel something more tangible, like a connection. She pressed play. The tape hissed. Then came Dai's voice. "I left this tape, in case you ever came back. I know you were afraid of me. But if you ever do return, go to the attic. Look at the photo in the second drawer on the right. You'll understand." Lynn stood up instantly. She hadn't checked that drawer. She went to the attic and opened the mentioned drawer. Inside was a small photo frame. Face down, she picked it up and turned it over. A photo of VY and Dewey sitting in the living room. But behind them, on the wall, a faint message appeared, as if written recently in charcoal. "I never left." Lynn's hands turned cold, but something in Dai's eyes in the photo had changed. He was looking at her, no longer sad, but as if expecting something. The next day, Lynn met the cafe owner again. Placing the letter and photo on the table, she asked softly, "Do you know where VY actually went after that night?" The woman shook her head. "No one knows for sure. Some said they saw her at the Eastern bus station, heading to Lam Dong. Others said she went back to her hometown in Bin Din, but no one ever confirmed anything." Lynn spoke slowly. "I don't think she ever left Saigon." The cafe owner looked at her intently. "Why do you think that?" Lynn exhaled deeply, then recounted everything: the journal, the letter, the photo, the tape. The cafe owner remained silent for a long time. Then she whispered, "You said you're 24, right?" Lynn nodded. The woman stared into the distance, her tone drifting. "This year marks 7 years since VY disappeared. She was about your age back then." Lynn froze. 7 years? She muttered. "What year was VY born?" The cafe owner pulled out a clipped newspaper photo from an old notebook, a faded black and white picture of VY, alongside a missing person notice. Tran Ton VY, born in 1999, disappeared October 2020. Lynn dropped her hands. She was also born in 1999. Same month, same day. Her heart raced. She asked softly, "Why did you keep this notice?" The woman looked at her, eyes as if searching deep within Lynn. "Because I'm V's cousin, but no one knows. I've seen her in dreams, many times, and she always said, 'Find someone like me, and I'll be set free.'" That night, Lynn sat by the window, mind tangled. She looked into the mirror, the dim yellow light casting a soft glow on her face. But in a fleeting moment, she didn't recognize herself. She saw herself wearing white, her hair longer than usual, her hands gripping the arm of the chair tightly. A voice echoed behind her. "You look like her, but you're not her. You're here to replace." Lynn turned around. No one there. She spoke quietly, as if under a trance. "Are you Dewey?" The voice replied slowly. "Yes." Lynn clenched her fists. "You're still here because she never answered you?" Silence. Then he spoke. "She never apologized," while looking into my eyes. Lynn stood, walked to the center of the room, and faced the balcony. "Then tonight, I'll say it for her." Her voice choked. "I'm sorry. For leaving you in your final moment. For not facing your true feelings. For choosing to run instead of facing you." The wind howled. The candle blew out. Outside, the wind chime on the balcony spun wildly, ringing out a strange, echoing sound. In that brief moment, Lynn saw Dewey, standing behind the glass door, smiling. A faint smile, like a silent thank you. Then he turned away. His figure vanished into the wind. And from that night on, no one called her at 3 a.m. again. But VY had not returned. Lynn knew this wasn't over yet, because the girl in the white dress in the mirror was still standing behind Lynn. Until morning came. The next morning, Lynn felt completely drained. She walked downstairs and opened the door to get some air. The Saigon sun was already shining. Yet inside she still felt cold. Not a skin-deep cold, but one that settled deep in her chest. She called her mother, just to hear a familiar voice. Then she took a walk around the neighborhood, trying to regain a sense of normalcy. The cafe run by the woman was still closed. Wooden chairs were neatly stacked inside behind the glass, and the menu board was flipped down. Lynn exhaled, quietly turning back. She hadn't eaten anything, but just as she stepped into the house, she froze. On the wooden table in the living room, Someone had placed a food tray, white rice, a fried egg, and mustard green soup. Not hot, but still warm. She scanned the room. "Is anyone here?" she called out, goosebumps rising. No response. She stepped forward, gently touched the bowl of soup. It was warm. It couldn't have been a dream. That afternoon, Lynn went downstairs to ask the neighboring houses, but no one claimed to have left the meal. She stood puzzled in the alley, then looked up at the house again. The third-floor window cracked open just slightly, then closed. She knew her house didn't have a third floor, only the attic. That night, Lynn didn't turn on the lights. She sat in the dark, facing the mirror in her bedroom, waiting. Exactly at 3 a.m., the clock on the shelf chimed 3 soft notes. Wind stirred on the balcony. The mirror no longer reflected her image, but the image of a girl standing just behind her shoulder. White dress, long, hanging hair, face obscured. Lynn whispered, "VY, if it's you, what do you want?" The figure didn't move. Lynn continued, her voice trembling, "I don't know what connection I have to you, but I've seen you, heard you, dreamed of you. I need to know, what do you need to rest in peace?" Silence from the mirror, but on the surface of the glass, moisture began to spread into words, written from inside out. "I didn't disappear." The next day, Lynn decided to seek out someone the cafe owner had mentioned, a man who had worked as a neighborhood guard for many years. When she met him, he simply nodded for a moment, then quietly poured some tea. Lynn spoke directly, "I want to ask about VY." The old guard paused, looking at her strangely. He asked slowly, "Are you related to her?" Lynn shook her head. "No, but I'm staying at her old house, number 24. And I think she's still there." He set his cup down, his hands slightly trembling. "You've seen her?" Lynn nodded gently. "I have." He sat in silence for a long time before finally speaking. "We used to think VY really left, because Dai's death was so sudden. But there's something no one's told you." Lynn looked at him, unconsciously tightening her grip on her handbag. He said, "Right after Dai's funeral, a week later, we heard water running in house 24 around midnight. When we went to check, no one answered the door. But one time, I saw VY standing on the balcony." Lynn exhaled softly. "So it's true?" He nodded. "It is. But back then, we didn't know if it was her or a spirit." She stood so still, then vanished. No one dared speak of it. Later, the family came to pack up the place and locked it up. It stayed empty ever since. Lynn asked, "No one reported to the police?" He answered quietly, "Of course they did, but no body, no evidence, no leads, and no one dared go inside after midnight." Lynn lowered her head, her chest turned colder with each word. That evening, Lynn reopened V's journal. She began reading from the very beginning, the parts she had skipped before. There was one page unlike the others. Not about daily routines, but about a dream. "Last night, I saw a girl walk into the house, wearing a dress just like mine. She stood on the balcony, called my name. I hid. I didn't dare come out. I knew she was me, but also not me. The dream keeps repeating. I think I'm being replaced." Lynn's hands turned cold. She looked up. In the mirror, it was that girl again, long hair, white dress, face cloaked in shadow. She stood behind Lynn, so close she could hear her quiet breathing. Lynn whispered, "Do you want me to leave?" The girl said nothing, but suddenly, wind rushed in from the window, knocking the journal onto the floor. As Lynn picked it up, a small piece of paper fell out. A pregnancy report. Patient name, Tran Ton VY. Date, October 15, 2020. Note, 6 weeks pregnant. Lynn froze. VY was pregnant when Dewey died. The next day, Lynn searched for the hospital listed on the paper. It had changed names, but old records remained. After explaining her situation several times, she was allowed to see the handwritten logs. An elderly nurse standing behind her quietly spoke. "There was a girl back then, came just once. After finding out she was pregnant, she never came back." Lynn asked, "Did she say anything?" The nurse nodded faintly. "Only one thing. As she left, 'It's too late. He's already gone.'" Lynn returned to house number 24. She climbed to the attic, step by creaking step. Each step made her heart thump louder. She walked to the small attic window. There, on the wall, someone had written a new message. "I did come back, but no one saw me." Lynn stood still. then whispered, "I see you." The space remained quiet. Then footsteps echoed behind her. Step by step, she turned. The girl in white stood at the top of the stairs. For the first time, Lynn saw V's face clearly. Not distorted, not tormented, just a deeply sorrowful face. And a pair of eyes, exactly like Lynn's. V's voice drifted out, soft as wind brushing her ear. "Thank you for saying what I couldn't." Lynn stepped forward. "I'm not sure who I am in all this, but I believe I didn't come here by accident." VY nodded. The attic wind faded. V's image grew fainter and fainter, then disappeared completely in the thin sunlight coming through the window. Lynn remained alone. No more voices calling her at 3 a.m. But from that night on, she began to dream of another house, of another woman, waiting to hear her final answer. For an entire week after that, everything in house number 24 became strangely quiet. No more sounds of running water in the night. No more shadowy figures behind the mirror. And no more howling wind down the hallway. Even though the window remained slightly open, Lynn slowly began to sleep again. Her appetite returned. She cleaned up the house, brought some of V's old belongings outside to air in the sun, then carefully packed each item into small cardboard boxes. But just as everything seemed to have finally settled, new dreams began to appear. She dreamed she was standing in a cramped room. The walls were covered with mold stains, like someone had splashed water and left it to grow and spread with time. In the middle of the room sat a woman, her back turned, brushing her hair. Her hair was extremely long, almost touching the floor. With each stroke, a screeching sound echoed like a razor scraping against plastic bristles. Lynn didn't dare come closer. But for some reason, her feet moved on their own. One step, then another. The woman suddenly stopped brushing. Her voice rose, hoarse and icy cold. "You step into the house of the dead. Don't dream of walking out alive." Lynn jolted awake, her entire body soaked in sweat. Outside the window, the Saigon streetlights still shone. Yet the house was as dark as a sealed tomb. The clock read exactly 3 a.m. She turned on the light, intending to get some water. But as she moved, she noticed the dishes in the kitchen had already been washed and neatly stacked. She hadn't touched them all evening. The next morning, Lynn returned to the attic. She pulled aside all the leaning wooden boards, checking every nook and cranny. Behind one board near the roof, she found a small hidden compartment. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. She unfolded it and read the crooked handwriting. "If someone else stays, then I must leave, but no one ever wants to go." There was no name below it. It wasn't V's handwriting. Lynn was sure of that. A chill ran down her spine. The note didn't feel like a complaint. It felt like someone who had once stayed there was offering their place. That afternoon, Lynn went to the market and tried asking around about the house's history. Most locals didn't say much, but an old woman selling dried goods unexpectedly spoke up when Lynn mentioned the house number. She spoke softly. That house didn't belong to VY back then. It used to belong to an old woman who lived alone. She collected recyclables. No husband, no children, lived there over 20 years. Lynn asked, "Do you know her name?" The woman paused, thinking. "I think her name was Hong." But no one really knew. One day she just stopped coming to the market, so people reported it to the local ward. When they opened the house, it was empty. She was gone. After that, the place was sealed up. And years later, it was sold. Was her body ever found? The old woman shook her head. No, but she used to say there was a shadow following her. She talked to herself a lot. Sat outside on the porch all day, just muttering alone. Lynn shivered. That night, Lynn left the lights on throughout the house. She turned the mirror to face the wall, shut the balcony doors, and locked the bedroom. But at 3 a.m., the sound of a comb brushing hair echoed again. Not from inside the room, but from downstairs. The combing was slow, dragging, as if the hand holding the comb no longer belonged to the living. Lynn pulled the blanket over her face, but the sound pierced through. She couldn't take it anymore. She jumped out of bed, turned on every light in the house, and ran down. No one was in the living room, but on the wooden chair lay a single, long silver strand of hair, draped across the seat. Lynn picked it up. The hair was icy cold. The next morning, she went to a nearby pagoda. She met with the head nun and briefly shared what she had experienced. The nun studied her for a long moment, then said, "There are spirits who carry no grudge, who don't wish to harm anyone. They just never leave, because the house holds their last memories." Lin asked softly, "If someone lived alone, forgotten, what do they become after death?" The nun answered slowly, "A shadow. A quiet shadow. No anger, no hatred, but they cannot let go if the newcomer doesn't see them." "I have to see them?" The nun nodded. "Not with your eyes, with your heart." That night, Lin didn't turn on the lights. She returned the mirror to its original position, opened the window, and sat on the floor, facing the balcony. The breeze swept in, gently lifting her hair. The mirror began to fog. It no longer reflected Lin, but a woman brushing her hair by the table. Lin whispered, "If you're still here, I will listen." The woman in the mirror stopped brushing. She didn't look at Lin, just bowed her head and kept silent. Lin closed her eyes and whispered, "I'm sorry if I unknowingly took your place. But if what you need is someone to remember you, then from now on, you are no longer alone." The wind died down. The mirror cleared. Only Lin remained, eyes closed, her heart still as water. That night, for the first time, she slept straight through until morning. But the next morning, in the mailbox outside the house, was a folded piece of paper. No sender's name, just one line. "Who are you?" Lin sat before the folded note, her fingers lightly holding the thin sheet as if it were a question from some invisible void. The slanted handwriting read, "Who are you?" There was no anger in the strokes, no sadness either, yet it made her chest tighten, as if something inside was being pulled taut. She placed the note on the table and turned on the fan. After a moment, the paper fluttered to the floor, brushing against her foot. It couldn't have been the old woman from that night. Not VY. Then who? She thought. The feeling was clearer than ever. At least 3 people had lived in this house, and none had truly left. That night, Lin left the lights off. She opened the window, gently drew the curtain aside, and placed a chair right where the streetlight streamed in from outside. In front of her was the old mirror. It reflected her silhouette and the dim outline of the balcony through the glass. Around 3 a.m., the wind picked up again. The curtain swayed. A plastic comb lying somewhere on the table began to roll slowly, as if nudged by a fingertip. Lin inhaled deeply, then spoke slowly. "My name is Lin. I'm 24. I moved in because I needed a quiet place, not to trespass, nor to forget those who once lived here." In the mirror's reflection, the image split in two, yet the actual mirror remained intact. A raspy voice whispered near Lin's ear, very close, "No one lives here after me." Lin didn't turn around. She kept her gaze fixed on the mirror, her voice calm. "If the one who lived here wants me gone, I will go. But if you only want to be known, then I'm here to listen." The mirror fogged over, and a shadow slowly appeared. It was a man. He stood behind Lin in the reflection, tall, dressed in an old white shirt. He didn't look at her, only stared straight out toward the balcony. Lin exhaled gently. "Is it you?" The man didn't reply. Only the sound of footsteps echoed from the floor below. She glanced toward the stairs. No one. But then, the footsteps stopped right outside her bedroom door. No knock, no creak, just standing there, breathing. The next morning, Lin sought out the building manager. She asked about the house's previous owners. The manager flipped through his notebook, turned a few pages, then said, "Number 24? Before VY. There was an old woman named Hong. But before her, it was a man named Nguyen. Some relative, I think. He held the house title and let her stay there. He passed away suddenly when he was still young." "He died in the house?" "Yeah, in the upstairs bedroom. They said it was a stroke. But rumor has it, he died sitting, eyes fixed on the balcony." Lin swallowed. "Did he live alone?" The manager shook his head. "He lived with a woman back then, but she left after the funeral. No one saw her again. They weren't legally married. She left all the papers with old lady Hong. She thanked him and went home. On the way back, one sentence kept echoing in her mind, 'No one lives here after me.'" That night, Lin placed a cup of hot tea on the table. She sat facing the mirror and lit an incense stick. "I know, your name was Nguyen. I don't know you, but I'm living in the space you once lived in. If there's something left unsaid, I'm ready to hear it." The mirror slowly clouded over, then began showing an image from the past. Not the current room, but the way it looked years ago. from the perspective of someone sitting in the shadows. A woman stood on the balcony. Her back turned. A warm yellow light shone through her hair, smooth and glowing. The man in the mirror, perhaps Nguyen, called out softly, "Are you really leaving?" The woman didn't turn around. She simply said, "Please let me go." Nguyen exhaled. "I can't stay without you," she replied slowly, her voice heavy. "Then, don't stay." She turned and walked away, leaving the balcony empty. The image faded. The mirror returned to showing Lin, sitting quietly, eyes wet. The next night, no one appeared. The wind still blew. The comb remained still on the table, and the mirror reflected no one but Lin. But each morning, in the mailbox outside the house, there was a folded note. No sender's name, just short lines. "Can you hear me? I'm afraid of being forgotten. Do you see the balcony? There's someone there." On the 7th day, the final note read, "I'm not going anywhere, but please, don't leave." Lin folded the paper, placed it inside an old photo frame, and set it on the windowsill. She sat down, gazing toward the balcony. The night was still and silent, but she knew someone was always standing there, not waiting to leave, just waiting to be remembered. That afternoon, Lin sat in her small workspace, pale golden sunlight filtering through the dust-covered glass window. She had cleaned it days ago, yet every morning, a thin mist seemed to settle like smoke. She quietly picked up a damp cloth and wiped it again. Suddenly, from the hallway outside came the sound of high heels, measured, steady, one step at a time. Lin cracked the door open and peeked outside. The hallway was empty, no one. She turned to close the door when a woman's voice whispered right next to her ear. "Do you see me yet?" Lin jolted, flicked on the light. The room was still empty, but on the desk, the framed photo of old Madame Hong had been turned to face the wall. That night, Lin dreamt she was walking down an endless corridor. White painted ceiling, worn old tiles, and rows of silent, closed doors on both sides. She kept walking and walking. Then suddenly, one door creaked open. Inside stood a young woman in white, long hair flowing down, facing a mirror. Lin stepped in. The woman slowly turned around. Her face was blurred, like it had been wiped from memory. She pointed at Lin and croaked, "Give me back my body." Lin woke up, drenched in cold sweat. In her hands, she was clutching Madame Hong's framed photo, without knowing when or why. The next morning, she went to see Ms. Tu, who had worked as a cleaner in the unit before her. Ms. Tu gave her a wary look, handing her a cup of tea. She said, "When I lived there, strange things happened too. That house doesn't just belong to Mr. Nguyen. There was another woman who once lived secretly there. No one knew her name." Lin frowned. "Did you ever see her?" "No, but one time, I opened the cabinet under the sink and found a whole box of handwritten letters. All signed, Lin, and at the time, I hadn't even met you. No one named Lin had moved in yet." Lin froze. She had never written any letters. But that box had her name. "Do you still have them?" she asked. Ms. Tu shook her head. "I burned them, but before they turned to ash." One final line showed up in red ink. It said, "I am the real Lin. Who are you?" That night, Lin sat in the middle of the room. She laid out a blanket, turned off all lights, and lit a single candle. The mirror was placed facing her, like it had always been meant to be. She whispered, "If the one in this house is not Mr. Nguyen, not Madame Hong, then please tell me. I'm not afraid, but I need to know who I am, and who's trying to live in my place." Silence. Then, the mirror turned hazy. It no longer reflected her. Instead, it showed a woman sitting in the exact same spot, same face, same hair, same posture, but her eyes were cold, stiff. The woman smiled softly and said, "I was the first to come here. You are just the shadow who thought she was real." Lin backed away. "What are you? I don't understand." The woman tilted her head, her eyes shimmering like water. "Your name is Lin, so is mine, but you got to live. I stayed trapped. Why? Because you walked in. You lived in my place. Now you have to return it." Lin shouted, "I didn't take anything from anyone. Didn't you? Check the drawer under your bed." Lin jumped up, ran to the bed, and yanked the drawer open. Inside was a silver necklace with a swallow pendant, something she had never seen before. Beside it was an old photo, a young woman standing in front of this very house, holding that necklace, her face full of hope. On the back of the photo, it read, Lynn 2003, first day moving in. Lynn staggered back, panicking. I was born in 2000. How can that be me? The woman in the mirror still looked at her. No longer angry, just sorrowful. You've been living in my place for 21 years. You thought it was just the same name? Same age? Same face? No, I have parents, a past, a birth certificate, friends. The reflection nodded slowly. And I only had one home left to wait in. The room began to tremble softly. Wind from the balcony blew in, stronger and stronger. The curtain was torn apart. The mirror shattered, but instead of falling, the shards spun around Lynn, like caught in an invisible vortex. The girl's voice echoed from every direction. You don't have to die. Just walk out of here, and never come back. Lynn clutched her head, tears streaming down. What if I stay? What if I don't leave? Silence. Then the voice grew quieter, sadder. Then neither of us will ever be free. The next morning, neighbors saw Lynn cleaning the balcony. She washed rags, cleaned picture frames, and placed a small flower pot freshly bought from the market. Everything inside was tidy, bright, but one thing had changed. The mirror in her room was gone, and she never placed another one in that same spot again. Each night, she still lit a single candle and placed it by the balcony. She never spoke, never called out. She just looked and waited. Lynn continued living in apartment number 24 for 7 more days. During that time, she never left the apartment for more than 3 hours a day. And each time she returned, she brought something back with her, a small bouquet of flowers, an old oil lamp, once even a box of incense from the decades-old shop on Trong Dinh Street. She still went to work, still spoke as usual, but the neighbors started to notice. One day, Ms. Mai from next door came by, standing outside the metal gate and calling in. Lynn, are you home? These past few nights, I've heard, someone talking in there with you. Lynn stepped out, still wearing her usual gentle smile. Tilting her head softly, she replied, Yes, I am. Kai, I've just been reading my journal out loud to myself. This old house, it gets so quiet, I'm afraid I'll forget the sound of voices. Ms. Mai gave a polite chuckle and said nothing more. But as she turned to leave, she noticed something in the living room window, a black and white photo taped to the glass. A girl, face unclear, long hair, white dress. The photo disappeared by the next morning. That night, Lynn sat in her room and opened her notebook to write. Her hands trembled slightly. The ink bled into faint circular stains. Under the candlelight, the words seemed to dissolve into the shadows. Day 7, the final night. She closed the notebook and placed it next to a fresh pot of blooming white chrysanthemums. Sitting still, she stared at the bare wall where the old mirror used to be. It was just an empty surface now, but she knew someone was still standing there. Every night, never missing a moment, Lynn spoke, her voice soft as breath. I've stayed here long enough. If you still want to live, borrow my body for just one more day. But don't hurt anyone. Don't trap anyone else. A very faint footstep echoed behind her. Then the voice returned, not angry, not vengeful this time, but weary, like the last breeze of the season before the weather turns. Thank you for seeing me as someone real. Lynn closed her eyes. The next morning, Ms. Mai knocked on the door several times but got no response. The lights were still on inside. By noon, she called building security. When they opened the door, the apartment was empty. No sounds, no signs of a struggle. Nothing was out of place. Only a single notebook lay on the table. The final line read, Lynn, the one who stayed. A month later, new tenants moved into apartment number 24. A young married couple. The wife was 4 months pregnant, frail-looking, but with a gentle smile. They told the neighbors the rent was cheap and the place was close to work, so they'd try it for a few months. On moving day, the husband climbed up to fix the ceiling light in the living room. When he removed the plastic cover, he gasped in shock. Wedged between the ceiling and a layer of drywall was a small rusted metal box, lined with yellowed papers. There was nothing valuable inside, just an old memorial photo, a silver necklace with a swallow pendant, and a picture of 3 women standing on a balcony, an elderly lady, a young woman, and another woman slightly obscured behind them, her long hair draping across her face, one hand gently touching the young woman's shoulder. Strangely, the young woman in the center, her face had been smudged out. Unrecognizable. The wife asked, "Maybe these belonged to the last tenant? Should I give them to security?" The husband hesitated, then shook his head. "Nah, I don't think they'll be coming back." He gathered everything, meaning to toss it in the trash. But as he reached for the bag, his hand suddenly felt ice cold. Inside the bag, the necklace he thought was still intact had already snapped in two. And the swallow pendant was missing. That night, the bathroom light began to flicker and wouldn't turn off. The wife stood brushing her hair, eyes fixed on the mirror. Behind her, through the misted glass, a shadow emerged, barefoot, silent. Slowly, it walked closer, stopped just behind her, and gently whispered, "Can you see me now?"